John Kasich vows to continue.
From the Battelle studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Jim Siegel, State House reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, Julie Carr-Smythe, State House correspondent for the Associated Press, Sam Gresham of Common Cause Ohio, and Mark Weaver, Republican strategist.
John Kasich insists he is no third wheel in the race for the Republican nomination, with Donald Trump halfway to the number of delegates he needs, and Ted Cruz trying to make up ground. John Kasich continues his role as the thinking Republicans' underdog. Even though he was shut out of delegates in this week's primaries, Kasich says he pays no attention to calls. He step aside and let the Cruz battle Trump one-on-one.
You know, we're just going to keep plugging, and we're continuing to raise money. And, you know, I think the calendar, we're going to do fine here. I'm not going to predict we're going to win here. But when we get to Pennsylvania, we get to New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, let me tell you, I drop out, Donald Trump is absolutely going to be the nominee.
Mark Weaver, you're a native of the East Coast. Is he right there that if he drops out, that clears the way for Ted Cruz to win New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut?
I think it remains to be seen. I think Ted Cruz can be competitive around the country, but I think Kasich's doing the right thing by staying in. The goal here for many Republicans is to get to Cleveland in an open convention. And at that point, if nobody has 1,267 on the first vote, then the delegates will pick our best nominee. That might be Donald Trump. It might be somebody else.
But Mark, there's a rule he's got to get past called Rule 40. You familiar with that?
Yeah, you have to win 8 states. But now, of course, Rule 40 was passed in 2012, and each new convention writes its own rules. So whether or not Rule 40 remains Rule 40, we'll see.
And he has another issue, too. He's got to have money to get him there. So he has some issues before he gets there. I'll say to you unequivocally, he's done better than what I thought he was going to do. I'll be honest.
Well, the goal of the party, of course, is to nominate the person who can win the White House. People forget that. People get caught up in the back and forth and the procedure of the primaries. The goal for the Republican Party is to win the White House.
Yeah, but if you have voted for Donald Trump in a state where he won, the vast plurality of the vote, and they pick somebody else, even though he's close to that number he needs, that throws out that vote completely. Why have a primary?
I think there'll be some people disappointed no matter what the outcome and no matter who's chosen. We know the Hillary Clinton fans were very disappointed when Barack Obama beat her in 2008. And there was a lot of talk about people being so mad that they'd stay home at the end. They didn't. They turned out to vote for the Democrat that year. I think Republicans will be the same way this year.
And Hillary Clinton had more votes than Barack Obama in 2008, but he won more delegates.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that what we heard again from Kasich in this clip is, I don't expect to win here. He's been saying that from day one. It's been an expectations game, and he's been winning it because he's kept the expectations extremely low. He's won 1 state, come in second, I think in 2, possibly 3. But I do think you make a point that when you get to Cleveland and somebody has not won more than his home state, it's going to be difficult to make the argument that that's not a coronation as opposed to an election.
I mean, there is a tremendous amount of call right now for him to get out of the race, both from the Cruz camp and the Trump camp. Those who both think that they would benefit. In fact, there was just a poll out actually that shows Cruz probably benefits a little more in Wisconsin if Kasich is not in the race. He wins, I think, by double digits over Trump, whereas it's more like 5 points if Kasich is in the race. But look, I've also seen arguments, and I think Kasich follows this philosophy that no one is going to beat Trump. No one's going to end up with more delegates than him at the end, even if he doesn't have enough. Yeah. No one will be ahead of him. And I mean, Cruz would need 80+% of the delegates to get to 47. And so he's arguing, look, I have a better shot of winning in these eastern states in Pennsylvania than Ted Cruz does. If I'm not in, Donald Trump probably wins all those states. And therefore, I'm actually helping the movement to block Donald Trump.
Yeah, but I have a problem with the math with that. I thought you were in the game to win. And in order for him to win, he needs 1,049 delegates. At this point in the race, the possibility of getting 1,049 delegates is remote that he will be able to do that. So my point is, I think he's done a good job, but what's the end game? Why are we here?
Well, let's take a look at some polls here that seem to be conflicting. First, you look at who Republicans would like to see as the GOP nominee. This is from Quinnipiac this past week. 43% say Donald Trump, 29% say Ted Cruz, and only 16% say John Kasich. In that same poll, they asked folks who has the best shot of beating Hillary Clinton. And Clinton beats Trump by 6 points. She beats Ted Cruz by 3, but John Kasich beats Hillary Clinton by 8 points. The key difference between those two polls is the first one, Mark Weaver, was Republican voters. The second one is all the voters. So that shows you that, and that's what the general election will be, is a mix of Republican and Democratic voters.
This is the Quinnipiac poll that the Kasich folks have been pointing to this week as the reason why they're staying in. They're making the case that they present the best possible opponent to Hillary Clinton in the fall. That's why I think you'll see John Kasich stay in. Whether he wins these states or not, he's going to stay in. And if nobody gets 1267, the delegates are going to have some pretty good people to choose from.
And we've always heard that, candidates sometimes have to reinvent themselves between a partisan primary and a general. And I think Kasich is trying to show that he can do both and somehow stay in the Republican and then win the general.
But Mike makes a good point. If Trump gets short of 1237 and they take this away from him, I think the Republican Party will collapse on its own weight. How do you take a man that nobody really likes, nobody in the party really likes, but he's winning, and then you take it from him? What happens then?
Mark, what do you think would happen? Would there be?
Well, as I said, there's going to be some people will be disappointed coming out of our convention. The only question is who. If we win the White House, disappointment goes away. There'll be a lot of disappointment if Hillary Clinton wins the White House. I'll tell you that right now.
Let me take this to a sports analogy, which Mark Weaver loves.
Sure.
Michigan State lost to Middle Tennessee State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Jim Siegel, people will say that Michigan State deserves to be in the Final Four, but they didn't win.
Right.
Can you say the same thing about John Kasich, that he's the best person to beat Hillary Clinton, but he didn't win?
Well, of course, the difference is there's an actual score at the end of each game, and in sports and in politics, if no one has the delegates needed to get the nomination, you can almost, the Republicans can throw the scores out. But there definitely is that concern that Donald Trump, if he does not win the nomination, and he has over 1,000 delegates, even though he doesn't have the required number, that he could tell his people to stay home. I mean, we've seen even again this week how vicious he can get on personal attacks. I mean, he would have no end to the number of people he could go after if he feels like he's been slighted to that degree.
Yep. I don't want to say it's interesting to watch, but it's just been incredible to watch how this is going to play out.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah, it's a new era, let's put it that way. Back to regular old politics. Democrats have been all over Senator Rob Portman this week, sending a flurry of emails, protesting outside his offices, trying to get him to change his mind and allow a Senate vote on President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. Portman and Republican leaders say the Senate should wait until voters choose a new president. But most Americans disagree. That Quinnipiac poll shows nearly 2/3 of those surveyed say the Senate should at least consider Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court. Jim Siegel, so people say the Senate should consider, but does that mean they would vote against Rob Portman for blocking it? Is those two things directly tied, do you think?
It's hard to say at this point. I mean, it's hard to say in March whether this issue will continue to be an issue that is carried through to November. I will say, though, that if with the prospects of Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, Rob Portman certainly is not looking for any more reasons for people to vote against him or for people to not show up and support him, because his race is already close in the polls, and there's a general thought out there that if Trump is at the top of the ticket, it's going to make things even more difficult for those underneath him on the ticket. So it's hard to say whether it resonates. I think the Democrats will definitely keep the pressure on because they can read polls as well as anyone. The polls say the people believe that it's the Senate should act. The Senate should at least as the Democrats have boiled it down to the words "do your job." That's what the polls are showing. Even if you don't, in the end, put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, you should at least give him fair hearings and give him a fair shake.
In some voter interviews we've been doing, you've got people who say when they're talking about the people should be allowed to speak, that the majority of the people in Ohio and the country did elect the current president. So therefore, this is part of his role.
They also, of course, elected the Senate. and the Senate has a joint role with the president. People think the president appoints justices. Of course he doesn't. He nominates, and their equal partner in that is the Senate, who is allowed to give advice and consent. And they are the sole determinant of when to give that advice and whether or not to give that consent. It does become a political issue, but as you mentioned, I think, Mike, in the polls, people say they'd like to have a hearing, but ask them where that is on their list of important things for America. We call this saliency in polling, right? It's way down. It's probably in the 15th or 20th thing down they care about. And so as a result, I do not think this will be an issue in the campaign this year.
I think there are two things that the Republican Party needs to keep in mind in particular. Black folk have a long memory. This is a black president. And every time this black president has attempted to do something, the Republican Party has viciously opposed him. Not just opposed him, but viciously opposed him. And I would say something else to what Mark said. Whether it's Cruz or Trump, the Republicans are going to have a hard time maintaining the Senate, because I don't think Cruz is a walk in the park either when you look at his philosophy and approaches. So I think this whole weight of the Supreme Court is going to be significant when you're only looking at 8 people and moving the Senate. It's going to be important.
Mark, getting to the politics again, why is Rob Portman not taking a more moderate stance on this? Why doesn't he say, look, I'll meet with Merrick Garland, let's have hearings, and we'll decide? Where 33% of likely probably Ohioans as well only 33% oppose it. Why is he catering to that 33% and not taking a more moderate stance?
I've not talked to Rob about this, but I expect that he will meet with this person at some point. Now, whether or not there'll be hearings, I don't think there will be hearings, because those people who say let's not have hearings, remember, they're saying this is a lame duck president who is trying to put a lifetime appointee that will change the balance of the Supreme Court. And under Joe Biden's very words from the Senate floor, he said in an election year when it's polarized, it's not the time to nominate a Supreme Court.
Well,
and
he did
those are
say
right.
not nominate a polarizing Supreme Court nominee.
Well, but of course, this would change the balance of the court. Yeah. And Joe Biden wants to take those words back now. And so for those people, you'd have to put Joe Biden in the category of someone who's racist as well, because under his own rule, there should not be a nominee in a lame duck presidency.
But there was a confirmation
Right.
during 1988 when
Well, that was
Anthony Kennedy
He was the third choice after 2 had been rejected twice, Bork and then
We
Ginsburg,
can't compare
right?
them. The relevancy of each one is in its own. And in this particular case, it is a president that won by 5 million votes and who had won 2 terms. And his term is not up yet. So he still has a
Well, he's
responsibility.
allowed to. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
Constitutionally, he's allowed to, and the Senate is also allowed to say,
you know
what, not the right time.
You know what the wonderful thing about that? Everything has political consequences.
It's true.
And you can make a decision to do that. But there can be political consequences.
And there is one more thing, which is if Rob Portman should lose his race, he's giving up his own chance to vote on this selection. So that's a dynamic that is interesting.
Well, I just think one of the key stats is 125 days is the longest that it's ever taken the Senate in the history of this country to actually vote on a nominee. Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland with more than 300 days left in his term. I could see this definitely being a different argument if this was July right now, and we really were, the Senate really was going to have to come in and kind of do a rush job, and maybe there was thought that we don't think we can give this the due consideration, but it's hard to argue, and I've also heard the argument about we need to do this in Rob Portman has said we need to do this in a less partisan time. Well, show me when we've had a less partisan time in the last 20 years. Now it heightens a little during presidential elections, but it has been very hyper-partisan in Congress, as everyone knows, for quite a while now. And there's no such thing as a calmer time when we're going to be able to have this nice, gentle debate on the Senate floor about a Supreme Court nominee.
All right. Ohio energy regulators near a decision on whether to guarantee profits for some aging coal-fueled power plants. AEP and First Energy want regulators to raise electric rates and guarantee profits while they modernize the grid and transition to more efficient ways to generate power. Consumer advocates and environmentalists call that a bailout that would set back efforts to increase competition and find cheaper, cleaner ways to generate electricity. Julie Carr Smythe, the bottom line question for all our viewers is, what does this do to my electric bill?
Right. Yeah. Both these plans, which are entirely separate, they've been lumped together and sort of for a reason, which I'll talk about. But in both cases, they will raise rates. The Consumers Council has estimated combined $5.9 billion. Do I have the bill?
Not for one
B,
person,
right?
for the whole state.
For the whole thing. But say in First Energy, $3 or $4 for your bill, and then they say they are going to deliver rebates toward the end of the plan, which is an 8-year plan. So short-term rate increases.
But others say those rate increases could be higher because they think they've underestimated what these guarantees might lead to.
Right, and one of the big questions is, of course, Ohio deregulated its electric industry, and as part of that, the power companies were supposed to go out there, compete on the open market as market factors would allow. And some people were saying, well, these are now less than cost-effective plants, but rather than reacting to the market and shutting those down, they're trying to keep them going. So
why not just shut down coal plants that are not profitable anymore? There are other options out there, aren't there?
Well, but the AEP wants to continue to make money and to grow their share of the market and pay their stock share. It's really a point of pointing out how technology has made certain things obsolescent, but we still need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So let's find some way to gin up a reason to get paid.
They also argue that it also provides reliable electric service, which the state
Reliable,
needs
for
for your home and also for businesses around the state.
Well, yeah, you can't just turn off these power plants. These are main generation plants. These are not just backups. These coal plants, especially for First Energy, I believe, provide a lot of, and in the nuclear plant especially, they provide a lot of the main base power, and so, I mean, they're kind of they are in a bit of a bind at this point. Now, you could certainly argue that they should have been dealing with this more over the last 20 years, and maybe they have been. But I think they're kind of boxing in themselves a little bit in that, well, now we have these plants. They are responsible for a good portion of our power, but they're expensive, and we're having to upgrade them. We're having, and they're basically falling out of favor as more more clean energy options become available.
Well, and we talk about this in the field of education. We talk about, the ball continues to be moved on what the goals are. The same happens in the power industry. One year they're told that they need to reduce carbon emissions by this much, and then they're told that the carbon emissions caps are going to change, and then they're told to use this much clean energy, and then they're told, no, the federal government wants you to completely shut down. So, I mean, to some extent, what the power companies told me is, well, we think that these are fair plans. AEPs has the support of Sierra Club, for example, and we need to be able to get to the end of this clean energy transition in a way that we can't currently afford.
Is this, Mark, where you ask for free market and you get it? You could be careful what you ask for in some ways?
At some point, you do have to let the free market enter in, right? And this has been a regulated industry for years, but if the goal is to move towards deregulation, market forces have to be allowed to take place. Sometimes that means prices will go up temporarily, but in the long haul, we know that free market forces bring prices down.
What guarantees do we have, Julie, that after these 8 years that they will shutter these inefficient plants if they cannot make money at them?
Well, I mean, I think that the deals do call for the not exactly the shutdown, but the phase down of those plants over time, and the guarantees go away. But that has been promised before, I think, so some of that just depends.
Mark, your point though, when you have a monopoly, do you really have a free market circumstance when you have a monopoly? I don't think you do.
Yeah, power's a different, the free market can only go so far when there's only so many lines that can run down your street. If you see pictures from early America in the early 20th century, you see electric wires crisscrossing streets every which way because everybody had their own power source. And so at some level, there's going to be only so many lines that are used for generation and transmission. Having said that, if the policy choice of the legislature is to deregulate, then let's deregulate.
Yeah, and one of the big issues that is making this such a hot button pair of cases is the fact that right now there are a lot of competitors that would love to enter this market. Some of them have filed complaints at the federal level saying, FERC needs to hop in here because the PUCO is going to support deals that we think are anti-competitive. So it's a very interesting
Yeah,
time.
very complicated, but it affects everybody because we all pay our electric bill.
Yeah.
Unless we got a windmill in the back or something.
A solar plate.
Waterfall.
Yeah.
Anyway, our last topic. Speaking of easy topics to solve, easy problems to solve, in some respects it seems like it was just yesterday. In other respects, it seems like this debate has gone on forever. This week marks the 6th anniversary of the signing of the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare, as it is known, mandates everyone get health insurance. It guarantees coverage for all conditions. It sets up government-run and subsidized private health insurance marketplaces, and it expands Medicaid. The number of uninsured has dropped around the country. Here in Ohio, the number without insurance has dropped by nearly 1 million. Critics complain Obamacare has not kept health insurance premiums from rising, and it has failed on its promises to allow patients to keep their own doctors. Sam Gresham, has Obamacare done what it promised to do?
Well, let's measure it. When Obamacare started, there were 1.3 million people in Ohio who were uninsured. That's now down to 402,000. Obamacare has, through its extended Medicare, provided services to an additional 665,000 people. Now, that says that the number of people uninsured in Ohio has gone down. Now, it has debunked the thing about it being a job killer. It is not a job killer. Now, does it say it has problems? Yes, it has problems. And historically, when things like this have come through, Congress has worked with the president to make little tweaks to it to make it work. We haven't had that opportunity because the polarization. We haven't had the penetration in Franklin County that we should have had that has occurred in Cuyahoga County and across the state. We haven't had that because the government infrastructure throughout the state has not supported going to ACA.
Here's the legacy of Obamacare. Mr. Obama promised that if you wanted to keep your physician, you could keep it. You could keep your physician. We know that's a lie. In fact, PolitiFact said that was the lie of the year. He said if you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. We know that was a lie. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their health care plan. We also know this is adding trillions of dollars to the deficit. So, and taxation. In fact, the financial impact of this is what really the legacy of Obamacare is. Of the state co-ops, half of them have failed. We're going to have Americans now know that Obamacare has failed. Earlier we talked about how only a third of Americans wanted to not see hearings on the Supreme Court nominee. Only a third of Americans give their approval rating to Obamacare. And so if we're listening to Americans about what they think, 35% of Americans give it approval. The rest are either can't stand it or they say the jury is still out.
But, Jim, it's entitlements, once they're here, people like the fact you can't exclude someone for having a pre-existing condition. They like the fact they can keep their kids on the parents' plan until they're 26. Mm-hmm. They like the subsidies. This is not going away anytime soon.
Well, it depends on who you listen to. Obviously, the Republicans want to see it go away, and if we elect a Republican president, there is a chance it may go away. But like
not
you
in
said,
total.
But it would be very difficult at this, 6 and by that point 7 years later, it's pretty much woven into the fabric, and then now you've just got to worry about making big changes if you really want to do something. But I just to kind of piggyback on what Mark said, the polls show, I'll just assume you're correct on your polling there, that 33% are only really supporting this. And if you think about it, most people, including probably most of us at this table, we didn't see a lot of difference in our healthcare plans because of Obamacare. I mean, if you work and your employer provides healthcare coverage, it may not be what you like, but it's not necessarily attributable to Obamacare one way or another. I do think that the lack of reduction in pricing and costs has been a definite shortfall so far. But like Sam said, these are the kind of things that need to be tinkered with and fixed over time, and we have seen no willingness at all in Congress to do that.
Julie, really quickly, the hospitals are the ones who've made out with this because they have all these newly insured folks, more folks on Medicaid, fewer free care. The hospitals did pretty well in this.
Right. They were, I guess, bearing a lot of those costs invisibly to a lot of people because they had requirements to do that. And so, yeah, I would say that they have made out.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots, and we'll start with you, Mark Weaver.
I've been watching politics for a long time, and I never thought we'd see a time when a major party would be poised to nominate somebody who came to power through a series of corrupt deals, who has flip-flopped and lied to get to where they've gotten to, and who is extremely unpopular to Americans. But it's inevitable Hillary Clinton will be the Democrat nominee.
Sam, top that one.
I thought he was talking about Donald Trump. Interesting perspective on life. I don't think I concur with that. I think it's going to be very interesting to get into the generals and Sir Trump and his behavior and his juvenile punches. When you get a woman, how is he going to treat this woman? Is he going to treat her just like that? He's going to put pictures of her husband and his husband. I mean, I think he's going to have to change his demeanor.
Julie.
Well, I guess I might go the opposite way in one component, which is there are some rumors beginning this week about Ted Cruz and what's been going on, and I think that we might not have seen the end of those.
Okay. And Jim.
April 19th and 26th, dates to keep an eye on. Those are a number of major primaries. New York, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island will all vote in those 2 days, and those could be really the days that determine whether Donald Trump gets to the mark he needs, or whether they're able to stop him.
Okay. In politics, there is a tradition of bringing on your rivals. Abraham Lincoln did it with William Seward and Salmon Chase. Barack Obama did it with Hillary Clinton. I do not predict that Mayor Andrew Ginther will hire Sheriff Zach Scott to be his new director of public safety, even though that search for that position continues. So I may get that one right. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, Facebook, Twitter, and our website, WOSU.org. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.